Asia, good evening America. You're watching World DNA with me, Raisha Sehgal. On the show today, Taiwanese are casting their votes for a new president in an election that could chart the trajectory of its ties with China over the next 4 years. We will be tracking the Taiwan polls very closely here on the show. But first, the headlines. Voters begin casting of ballot in Taiwan's presidential and legislative elections. The high-stake elections are being closely watched as China steps up its rhetoric over the self-ruled island. US military says Yemen's Houthis launched an anti-ship ballistic missile in retaliation for US-UK strikes in Yemen. While the missile did not hit any ships, the US Navy has warned American-flagged vessels to stay out of areas around Yemen in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden for the next 72 hours. Thousands of Yemenis in the Houthi-controlled capital Sana'a demonstrate following a wave of US-led strikes in Yemen. Demonstrators express support for the Palestinian cause and demand strong retaliation. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky sign a decade-long security pact in Kiev. Sunak speaks to the Ukrainian parliament and says Ukraine belongs in NATO and NATO will be stronger with Ukraine. It's India versus Australia again, but this time it's not cricket. The Indian football team begin their Asian Cup campaign as firm underdogs against Australia, who are one of the favourites for the title. The high-stake elections in Taiwan have begun. Voters began casting ballots in Taiwan's presidential and legislative elections, a poll closely watched as China steps up its rhetoric over the self-ruled island. Polls opened at 8 a.m. local time at nearly 18,000 locations from the island's south to its capital, Taipei. Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen has cast her vote. Remember, Tsai is constitutionally barred from standing again after 2 terms in office. Taiwan People's Party leader Ko Wen-je was also among the early voters. Earlier, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken met with Liu Shancho, a Chinese diplomat and a top contender to be China's next foreign minister. The meeting took place in Washington just hours before the polls in Taiwan. The U.S. continued to caution China against using the election as a pretext for instability. As reports quoting the State Department, Blinken has asked China for cross-strait stability. And in news just coming in, Taiwan's defense minister says it had detected 2 Chinese balloons crossing the Taiwan Strait in the previous 24 hours, one of which flew over Taiwan's island. And now, joining us live from Taipei, we have our Voice of America correspondent, Elizabeth Lee, joining us live. Thanks very much for joining us here on WION, Ms. Lee.
You're welcome. Well, today...
Right, Ms. Lee. Now, the high-stakes election in Taiwan have begun. Give us a sense of the on-ground situation in Taiwan. You're joining us live from Taipei.
Yes, well, there has been much anticipation leading up to today, and people have been talking about it all week. And many of the people for the last couple of days and today have been buying train tickets, plane tickets, just trying to get home to where they're registered to vote. A lot of them are working in the big cities like Taipei, but they actually are registered in a smaller city or a town. So people have traveled and they're voting today. And just some of the fun buzz around here is that a lot of the local convenience stores and restaurants are offering special deals for people who have voted. And so there's really been a big encouragement for people to go out and vote.
Right, Ms. Lee, China has called the election in Taiwan as a choice between war and peace. How are the voters viewing varying stances by the contestants towards China?
It really depends. We spoke to a lot of people in the past week, and it really depends on the age of the voters. The younger set, especially those who are in the service industry, actually are more concerned about domestic issues, about stagnant wages, about high cost of living and high housing prices. And so many of these younger voters really want the candidates to pay attention on more domestic issues because they're really tired of hearing about cross-race relations. Now, if it's an older set of voters, middle-aged and up, they are very concerned about cross-race relations. But as you mentioned earlier in the newscast about these balloons flying in the air, China's intimidation tactics, for them, it's business as usual. They pretty much ignore news of these things happening because they don't see it overhead. They just hear about it. And so it's been going on for 80 years or more, that this threat of China possibly one day coming over and attacking Taiwan. So people are actually used to the idea, but they are concerned about the future and the survival of Taiwan. Most of the people here, regardless of who they decide to vote for, want the status quo. Those who support the KMT, which is the opposition party, would like more dialogue with China, more business and trade with China, but they also want Taiwan to be democratic. Then the DPP, which is what Tsai Ing-wen, that's the party of Taiwan, and Lai Ching-te, who is the vice president running for president, they have a more pro-Taiwan stance. And so they've been careful about talking about independence, but that party tends to lean to have Taiwan be independent. And so if William Lai Ching-te, ends up becoming the president, then there's some expectation that China may also have some sort of response. And that's why everyone is keeping a very close eye on what the results are. Polls close at 4 o'clock today, and results are expected to come back at around between 8 and 10 o'clock Taipei time.
Yes, Ms. Lee, you speak of how the young voters are not really concerned about the issue of China here. What are the other issues that the voters are concerned in the polls today in Taiwan?
High cost of housing is a huge issue. People say they can't even afford rent, especially because wages, again, in the service industry has been stagnant. Again, inflation is something that countries around the world have been dealing with, and that's also the case in Taiwan. And traffic is another local problem. But these are just some of the local problems. But again, kind of the cross-race relations, the relationship with China kind of is also something that people is definitely thinking about. And that's also something all three candidates have been speaking about and trying to differentiate themselves on what their platform is with China. Because at the end of the day, nobody wants war. Everybody prefers to keep peace and the status quo.
Thanks, Ms. Lee, for joining us here in WION. We'll, of course, be tracking the Taiwan polls very closely here. Thanks very much. Let's now tell you about the countries that recognize Taiwan as a sovereign nation. And they are Belize, Guatemala, Haiti, Honduras, the Marshall Islands, Nauru, Palau, Paraguay, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and lastly, Tuvalu. Let's also now tell you about the key contestants in today's poll. Lai Ching-te from the Democratic Progressive Party, DPP, he has promised to stick to Tsai's careful approach to the island's thorniest issue. That is, Taiwan is in practice independent from China, while he has been practicing for an independent Taiwan. And he has been campaigning regarding that as well. The second contestant is Hugh Hyo-hye from the KMT party. He has been campaigning for establishing ties with China and is seen as a pro-China contestant. And lastly, we have Ko Wen-jae, who is from Taiwan's People's Party. He is a new entrant in the race and he also has his leanings towards China as well. Let's also now talk about the significance of Taiwan. Remember, the island is near the Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea. This makes up for one of the world's busiest shipping routes. In fact, close to half of the world's container ships, they pass through the Taiwan Strait every year. The strait links Northeast Asia with West Asia and Europe, allowing the trade of food, natural resources and consumer goods. And that is why Taiwan is extremely important. Now, the island's newly elected president will decide whether Taiwan sees a sovereign future or not. The polls will also shape future ties between Beijing and Washington. The concern just does not end here. Taiwan supplies over half the world's semiconductor chips. A conflict in the area could disrupt global trade and drive up prices. Now, polling has begun and all above the age of 20 can cast their vote. In an island that houses over 23 million people, over 19 million people are eligible to vote. But Taiwan's voter turnout has declined nearly 15% since the early 2000s. The drop is particularly severe among younger voters. The question being, will this election today in Taiwan mark a difference? Fears of a regional war lingers, with more countries now being involved in the ongoing Israel-Hamas war. US and British forces have carried out additional strikes on Houthi-linked targets in Yemen. Well, earlier on Friday, US and UK forces targeted nearly 30 sites with more than 150 munitions in Yemen in the first round of strikes. Houthi have called out Washington, saying that they are ready for an open war. US military says that Houthis launched an anti-ship ballistic missile in retaliation for the strikes in Yemen. While the missile did not hit any ships, the US Navy has warned American-flagged vessels to stay out of areas around Yemen in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden for the next 72 hours. Now, the strikes are in response to the attacks on Red Sea shipping carried out by the Iran-backed militants, which they say is a response to the war in Gaza. The Houthis say that at least 5 people died and 6 were injured in the first attack on Yemen. US President Joe Biden says that he does not believe that any civilian has died in the strikes. He described the Iran-backed group as terrorists and warned to retaliate further if Houthis continue, and I'm quoting here, outrageous behavior. Biden says that his administration has delivered a message to Iran and that Iran knows not to do anything. The US president says that he does not want a war with Iran, which is seen as a huge risk ahead of presidential polls in the United States of America. On the other hand, Iran has strongly condemned the attack and has warned that it will fuel insecurity and instability in the region. Iran's foreign ministry said that the attacks are a clear violation of Yemen's sovereignty and integrity and a breach of international laws as well. Meanwhile, the United Nations Security Council on Friday discussed the war in Gaza and the strikes on Yemen. The UN Secretary General reiterated that attacks against international shipping in the Red Sea are not acceptable, while Russia strongly condemned the strikes and said They amounted to an irresponsible adventure and risk across the entire West Asia. China also shared concerns over a regional spillover with the strikes. The attack in Yemen has triggered huge demonstrations. Thousands gathered in Sana'a in the Houthi-controlled Yemeni capital, and they were seen bearing Palestinian flags, placards of the Houthis, and official slogans, and the picture of the supreme leader as well. Well, these are the scenes from the Yemeni city Hodeidah. Thousands of people, some carrying rifles, gathered for a demonstration as well. In Tehran, several students and residents burnt flags as they demonstrated outside the British embassy. In yet another flashpoint within West Asia, Iran state media has released the footage of the U.S. oil tanker St. Nicholas that was seized from the Gulf of Oman by the Iranian Navy. On Thursday, St. Nicholas sailed close to Omani city of Sohar, carrying Iraqi crude destined for Turkey. According to the Iranian state media, the move is being seen as a retaliation for last year's confiscation by the United States of America. The capturing of St. Nicholas is likely to stoke and intensify further tensions in the West Asian region.
This oil tanker was carrying oil in the Gulf of Oman with its name changed to St. Nicholas. The Islamic Republic of Iran Navy seized it with a court order as retaliation for the United States oil theft from Iran.
And hitting out at the United States, the commander of Iranian naval forces declared that time of hit and run is over. He further said that Iran considers the company that is emptying their oil resources responsible along with the United States of America. Take a listen.
The time of hit and run is over. Really, if they hit, they will be hurt. We are declaring now that if a country attempts to do this, we consider that company which is emptying our oil responsible. And we also consider the US responsible.
The US had seized the St. Nicholas oil tanker last year as a part of sanction enforcement operation. Back then, St. Nicholas sailed under a different name called Suez Rajan. Now, the seizure comes at a time when tensions are on the rise due to confrontation between Iran-backed Houthis and the US-led alliance in the Red Sea. The Red Sea crisis has unleashed a cascade of disruptions in global shipping. Container rates have skyrocketed for routes from India to the US and doubled or even tripled for certain European regions. Now, oil prices have surged as the US and its allies launched airstrikes against Houthis in Yemen. And this was retaliation for Houthi attacks on ships in the Red Sea. Now, the global benchmark Brent crude rose to $80 per barrel for the first time this year before falling to $78 per barrel. A tanker industry group said that the military forces in the region were advising ships to avoid a key choke point near Yemen. A major Danish fuel tanker firm announced that it will no longer permit its fleet to pass through the southern Red Sea. And this indicates the interruption caused by the attacks on Yemen overnight might worsen the situation which is already plaguing the oil markets. Next week, Volvo will cease operations at its facility in Belgium due to supply chain disruptions from the Red Sea snarl. And this comes after Tesla announced a shutdown of its gigafactory operations near Berlin for 2 weeks. China's largest shipping carrier, COSCO, has suspended trips through the region. Maersk, a shipping giant, is diverting all vessels around the Cape of Good Hope for the foreseeable future. Other companies, including IKEA, have warned of delays in deliveries. Shipping costs have surged dramatically, with container rates experiencing a staggering 30 to 400% increase. And this impacts consumer goods industries, from rice exports to clothing to oil. The global economic impact looks to be profound as a result of increased fuel costs, transit times, and a challenging business environment. With delays adding 12 to 14 days to sailing schedules, the ripple effects are expected to impact the production and demand and trigger potential inflation spikes. Let's now take a look at the top stories from the world of showbiz. Parasite director Bong Joon-ho and other members of South Korea's entertainment industry urged authorities to thoroughly probe the case of actor Lee Song-kyun, who was found dead amid a drug probe. The 48-year-old actor, who played a wealthy patriarch in the Oscar-winning movie Parasite, died in December under mysterious circumstances. Lee's death brought an outpouring of sympathy from the movie industry and the public alike. It also raised questions over the harsh and public nature of the probe that fueled media coverage into Lee's private life. The holdovers and killers of the Flower Moon earned multiple laurels at the National Board of Review Awards in New York. While director Martin Scorsese was named the best director for Killers of the Flower Moon, his female lead, Lily Gladstone, was named the best actress. Actor Bradley Cooper earned the Icon Award for writing, directing and starring in Maestro, a movie about composer Leonard Bernstein. SAG-AFTRA has revealed the nominations for the 2024 Screen Actors Guild Awards. Barbie and Oppenheimer lead the movie nominees with 4 nominations each, while Killers of the Flower Moon received 3 nods. The Color Purple and Maestro got 2 nominations each. HBO's Succession led the TV categories with 5 nominations. The Bear, The Last of Us and Ted Lasso all earned 4 nods. The ceremony is all set to take place in Los Angeles on February 24th. With that, we call it a wrap, but don't go anywhere. This is WION's continuous coverage of the polls in Taiwan. Stay with us. You're watching WION World is One.
This week on Tech It Out, our focus is on CES 2024, the world's biggest technology show. We show you interesting devices, futuristic gadgets, and cutting-edge consumer electronics that dominated the tech extravaganza this year. This and more on WION World is One at these times.
Avatar of Ayodhya, which is being created, is being able to re-energize, reinvigorate that city while we continue to celebrate what it has been known for and do not take away from its historical significance or the built environment.
This week on Inside South Asia, a diplomatic row between Mali and New Delhi backfires on the Maldivian tourism sector, and the tale of 2 elections in the subcontinent. In Bangladesh, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina continues, and in Bhutan, the people pin hope on a new government. A look at some climate adaptation projects that aim to control the damage of deadly floods in the subcontinent. And can 12th Fail win the best film at the Oscars? All this and much more on Inside South Asia.
On Wings this week, we explore the current hype around Lakshadweep, where Modi took a stroll. We jump into a helicopter and soar over the desert dunes of Alula in Saudi Arabia, and feature how